A lot of the talk here, I imagine, behind closed doors will be on tariffs. It will be on trade. How worried are you about that?
Well, there's quite a bit of noise about measures that we're taking from one side and the other. The market has been quite anxious about this type of interactions. They even call it trade wars. But at the end of the day, I hope the countries enter into negotiations and they end up settling things.
Right. But Brazil is in a unique position because it's under U.S. influence, but at the time your biggest market is actually China. So could you benefit from a so-called trade war between the U.S. and China where you would have no role to play apart from filling maybe the U.S. vacuum?
Well, we got this type of question, but I have to say nobody will benefit because what we believe is in trade openings and trade will benefit everybody. So at the end of the day, it may be false to believe that somebody will benefit from those.
Okay, but Governor, even if there's not a full-blown trade war, just the fact that the U.S. opened up the possibility, do you think your trade with China will become stronger?
The trade with China is already strong in the sense that China is our first market. We sell soybeans, iron ore. They are our main import country.
But so that could actually be increased because they're mad with the U.S. because they're putting pressure on them.
Yes, but at the end of the day, I will prefer, if you let me two options, benefiting from this conflict or not having the conflict and continue in a benign global environment. I will prefer the benign global environment.
All right. Are you worried that a trade war would then put the whole world growth into a recessionary environment?
I'm concerned that this type of conflicts will lead to risk-off in markets, high premiums, less capital flows, and at the end of the day, the benign environment that we have been enjoying in the last few years will not continue.
Are we in a trade war? Are we in tensions?
No, we're just at the beginning of negotiations and a lot of noise, but not yet there.
Okay, but are we challenging the model of globalization, or do you think it's just little points here and there, but there's not an overwhelming want to change the way that globalization works?
Well, I hope so. I hope that what we are experiencing is just more noise, but not really a change of trend.
Governor, talk to me about Brazilian growth.
Yes.
So 2017 was quite strong. The forecasts for 2018 are actually driven downwards. Are you concerned that it's going to get worse?
Well, there's a gradual recovery. The growth forecast for this year and next year is between 2.5% and 3%. For next year, it's 3%. For this year, market expects 2.8%. Our forecast is 2.6%. And there is times when people go to the lower bound, 2.5%. But at the end of the day, it's a recovery. It's much better than the recession we had, but less than we will hope, which is a V-shaped recovery, strong. It's a gradual recovery, but it's consistent. Okay,
but are there more pressures to the downside at the moment, or pressures to the upside?
I think they are symmetric. I think it's a gradual growth. There are pressures to grow faster, and there are uncertainties that push to grow less.
Okay, is there anything that the government can do to actually sustain growth so that the recovery is stronger and more gradual to the upside?
We need to continue in the reform agenda. There were reforms that increased productivity, like the labor reforms, and there were reforms that deal with the fiscal issues, like the spending cap. But we need to continue, for example, with the pension reform that was delayed, was supposed to be voted at the beginning of the year, but this year is an election year, so it was delayed for after the election.
So what do investors ask you when they see, do you get more questions on trade wars or do you get more questions on the elections?
I got questions on both, and also on the monetary policy normalization in the U.S. and other countries, how this will affect countries like Brazil.
And how do you think, Fed will affect Brazil?
I think it's well communicated. If it's gradually increasing, it's a normal development. After all, the U.S. is close to full employment. There's a widespread recovery all around the globe, in Europe, in Japan, in China, in other major markets. So it's normal for rates to go up. What the risk is that they go up in a more discreet way, in a surprising way. And this is where the people ask me, about the consequences.
Okay, so let's say inflation in the U.S. is much stronger than expected, and so let's assume that the Fed has to raise rates more times than expected. What does that mean for Brazil?
It means that you'll see a reversal of capital flows, you'll see a risk-off environment, you'll see a little bit more volatility in the market, which will mean that we need to be prepared for that scenario. And in this case, well, we have built some buffers. We have 20% of GDP in reserves. We have a small amount of liabilities in dollars, which are the swaps. We have a small current account deficit. Our inflation is running below the target for a country that used to have high inflation.
Yeah, I want to get to inflation in a second, but if the Fed were to surprise the market, and again, this is a position, would you intervene in the market? Is that a tool that you think is in the top three?
Yes, it's a tool that we could use. Of course, we're respecting that the currency is a floating currency, that it has to reflect the fundamentals, but we will be close to the market to see if the dynamics are benign, if there's any weird dynamics, if the market is functioning well. So we will be there to give tranquility to markets.
How does it work? Do you speak with the Fed on a regular basis to kind of try and understand what the impact is on Brazil?
We are all part of the BIS. We actually both part of the BIS board. We meet at least every 2 months for 2 days, and we discuss what's happening, what are the impact. So we have specific forums where we discuss. We do not really tell each other what we're going to do. We just talk about the macroeconomics.
Governor, when it comes to inflation in Brazil, so it used to be high, and now it's actually not so high. Why is it so difficult to get inflation going in Brazil?
Well, in the last decades, we were trying to bring inflation from high levels, like in beginning of 2016, less than a year and a half ago, we had an inflation of almost 11%. So there was a quite important disinflation, and now we are running around 3%, which is a very important development in Brazil.
But Governor, I was reading a note by Goldman Sachs saying that actually it could, your currency could go to $3. If that happens, what's the impact on inflation? Would it be even more difficult to reach that, your inflation target going up?
Well, the currency is one of the variables that affect the forecast. It's a relative price. It's important, the employment, activity, expectations by agents, demand, all of that enter into the picture. So there's nothing special about the currency. It's just another relative price that will affect them.
But it makes your life harder, though.
Well, if you're talking about depreciation, it means that we have room because we are below the target. Inflation is running at 3%, and the target is 4.5% this year, 4.25%, and then 4%. So there is a buffer there.
But Governor, are you worried that you have a developing nation kind of growth with actually an inflation that looks more like a developed nation? So, is that, how can you match the two?
Well, we work hard to have an inflation as a developed economy. Actually, developed economies are fighting for inflation to come back from below. So we were fighting to come from above, and they're fighting to come from below. And we all seems to go to the target. And of course, if I have inflation below the target, I have space to stimulate the economy and help the recovery.
Okay, so you're telling me this is a good problem, that inflation is below target or difficult to get up?
It has not been difficult to get up. We just had the first year. That was our first year of inflation below target, and all the others in the last 10 or 20 years were inflation above target.
Okay.
So that's a good problem for a change.
Okay. What did you think was the underlying cause of that first struggle for inflation to pick up?
Now I think what is bringing inflation down was first the fact that the central bank was very firm on getting into the target. Second, we have still idle resources. We have unemployment. We have capacity, excess capacity. We also have food deflation. We had a deflation of 5% last year. And finally, once in a country like Brazil that has inertia, once you get to low inflation, it tends to perpetuate.
Governor, talk to me a little bit about central bank independence. So a lot of people agree that this is something that's needed. Do you think it will happen with congressional approval by the end of the year?
Well, we do have an independence of de facto. This is how we deal. And now the government has sent a bill to Congress to vote for the central bank independence de jure. It will depend on the votes. We will see how the Congress will vote on that.